Gedi Taub, thanks for joining us on CBN News. In your mind, what is the main issue facing between Israel and the United States right now?
Thank you for having me. Well, I think that the clash of interests is becoming more and more acute because this war doesn't figure into the general Middle East policy of the American administration, which is not always honest about. The general policy in the Middle East, they call it regional integration. And when you ask who are you going to integrate, the answer is, of course, Iran. And the general philosophy says that the problem is that America's allies drag it into repeated wars, and it's not going to let Israel and the Saudis drag it into a war with Iran. And the way to avoid that, they think, is by appeasing Iran. This is why the sanctions have become mostly a dead letter. The coffers of the regime in Tehran are now filled with tens, possibly more, billions that America has helped it release. And Iran is setting the whole Middle East on fire. And what the Biden administration does in every hotspot is signal to Iran that we are willing to reach accommodation. They call it de-escalation. This is why they prevent the Saudis from attacking the Houthis. They prevent Israel from attacking Hezbollah. And now they're trying to do the same in Gaza. And they have been using more and more extreme and more radical means. That just yesterday, President Biden gave a heartfelt speech against anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, and we'll never forget, and the atrocities of Hamas. But he didn't repeat the original war aims of destroying Hamas, which he is now preventing Israel from doing. And this is an existential matter. And they are using all forms of pressure, including the threat to recognize a Palestinian state unilaterally, the personal attacks on Benjamin Netanyahu, the avoiding of a veto of an anti-Israeli decision in the UN Security Council, the lack of action against the ICC, who is threatening outrageously to issue warrants against the Prime Minister of Israel, and the fact that they have forced us to send aid to Hamas and try to prevent us from entering Rafah. So there is an essential conflict of interests, and they are now holding us by the throat because they are withholding ammunition from the IDF. So Israel needs to fight this war. If it is to survive, it will need to fight more wars because it would need to break the noose that Iran has been constructing around us. And the United States is protecting that noose. So it's talking in two separate languages, but we look at the actions and not just at the words. And the actions mean that if we surrender to American demands and this would mean that Hamas would stay on its feet at the end of this war, and if the Americans would have their way, or this administration would, they will then force us to agree to a Palestinian state, another terror state, 15 times bigger than Gaza, in the heart of the land of Israel, in Judea and Samaria.
In what way is the Biden administration actually cooperating with some of the political entities here in Israel?
Oh, very much so. Tony Badran in Tablet remarked long ago that this is a repeat of the Roman Empire with King Herod the Great. The Americans are trying to crown Benny Gantz in order to install here basically a puppet government which will do their bidding. And this, Badran remarked in Tablet, is exactly what the Roman Empire did with King Herod, and we know how that ended. It started with one Jewish faction leaning on the strong empire in order to defeat the other faction, and it ended with the loss of Jewish independence when the land of Israel became just a province of the Roman Empire directly ruled by Rome, and a little later in exile. So are we to walk down that road if we agree to be run by, by the United States? I want to remind you that William Burns is here now meeting with the heads of the security establishment in Israel, and Tony Blinken was here and asked for a one-on-one meeting with the chief of staff of the IDF. What kind of idea is that? Is America trying to run the Israeli army under the nose of the government? It did something similar when it backtracked from that. It was going to sanction a specific unit of the IDF. The IDF has a chain of command. You cannot make a unit in the IDF subordinate to American demands because America puts sanctions on that part of your army. These are only the manifestations of the same general phenomenon that we feel America is trying to impose its policy over the heads of an Israeli electorate that rejects it, and especially the big plan or the grand plan of returning to the two-state solution, which the Israeli public has rejected forcefully before October 7 and will probably be much more hostile to after October 7.
Yeah. How would you describe the Israeli public in terms of supporting Benjamin Netanyahu in terms of the war efforts and aims?
Well, I think the public generally supports the aims. The press is trying to obfuscate this because the press is a party to this struggle. Israel's elites still believe in the two-state solution, and they have long ago given up on persuading the electorate, and what they are inviting instead is American pressure. So what the press did, because it can't openly promote with its Israeli readers and viewers the idea of a two-state solution, is they've tried to shift the discussion of the war aims from defeating Hamas to the return of the hostages at any price. This is, in my opinion, a moral outrage, because the campaign for returning the hostages is putting pressure on Israel's government. What does that do in reality, Chris? What it does is it makes Yichud Sinwar raise his demands, because he can sit back and count on American and internal Israeli pressure against Netanyahu. This is because the press is almost unanimously an anti-Netanyahu party, and you read some of these things in Yediot Achronot or listen to their main news shows on the commercial channels, and you would think that they would like Netanyahu to lose the war as if this was not Israel's war. But I think generally the Israeli public knows that it cannot acquiesce to the idea that a neo-Nazi regime in Gaza will remain after this war. We have seen the unbelievable cruelty, the joy in tying together members of family with barbed wires and then burning them alive. This is not something that we are going to forget. And mind you, there are about 100,000 people who cannot return to their homes. It doesn't matter how many times the press will tell you that it would be wonderful to finish this war with a hostage deal. These people will not return home because a hostage deal will not ensure them of safety in the future.
The other day, there was a confusing scenario. It seemed like Hamas rejected the deal, and then they accepted the deal, but apparently Israel wasn't party to that second deal. In what way was the U.S. part of that second negotiation?
Well, according to the chief pundit on Channel 12, Amit Segal, what really happened was that Hamas demanded an end to the war. Israel cannot agree to that. Apparently, according to some reports, the Americans said to Hamas, you sign some version of this deal without a promise to end the war, and we will not let Israel renew the war. Once this plan was leaked to Israeli officials, on Saturday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued two statements, in the beginning anonymously, but the press did not respect ethics, and then said that it was him directly, and they were intended to preempt the noose that we thought America was tying around our neck. Because imagine if there would have been a deal that doesn't say an end to the war, and then Netanyahu would be the one not to agree to it because he knows that there is this promise to end the war, then we would be in a trap 3 months from now, after the ceasefire should have elapsed, and unable to renew the war. So Netanyahu intercepted that deal by making it public, and so prevented, at least internally, to those Israelis who are following the actual news, not just the propaganda. He managed to extract us from a trap that our great ally apparently was laying for us.
What do you think the world is not getting about the war right now between Israel and Hamas?
The world sees it in the exact opposite way. It turned everything on its head. This talk of genocide, the audacity of the International Court of Justice in The Hague to blame us for genocide after we are fighting a genocidal regime. The aim of Hamas is to eradicate the Jewish people and to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And we are fighting to protect ourselves in a very difficult situation where they are using their civilian population as human shields. As Netanyahu himself once said, we protect our women and children with weapons. They protect their weapons with women and children. And still, Israel has fought this war so carefully that the ratio of civilian deaths to combatant deaths are 1:7 to 3, according to estimates by the United States and Israel. This is about at least a third of what is the average on such wars. So this is probably the war with the least, with the smallest ratio of civilian deaths, despite the fact that Hamas is putting them deliberately in harm's way. Hamas used all its international aid to build terror tunnels and none of it to build shelters for its population. It is trying to maximize the deaths of its own population. But the world is cooperating with Hamas lies. Even President Biden, as you know, mentioned the Hamas numbers of civilian casualties as if Hamas does not lie about these things. He quoted the numbers from the Hamas Health Ministry as if they were facts without mentioning where they came from. So when the United States is trying to put pressure on us to end this war, because this war is a problem for the whole Middle Eastern policy of the Democratic Party. If it spreads to the north with Hezbollah and the whole regional integration, the whole attempt to conceal the fact that they are appeasing Iran will collapse on their heads. So they are doing their utmost in order to crush Israel's drive to win this war, and they are not even stopping at propaganda lies, or otherwise they would have done what the United States usually does when its allies and itself are threatened by international courts. Let me remind you that under George Bush, the son, Congress passed a decision fondly called the Invasion of Hague decision, in which they said that if the International Court lays a hand on American servicemen, America would use any means at its disposal in order to free them. By that, it's called the Invasion of Hague because by any means apparently mean also military, which probably would not have been the case, and a threat was enough. Some right-minded senators have now drafted a letter that that Congress would move to sanction the International Criminal Court if it dares to issue an indictment or a warrant to the arrest of a prime minister of an allied state. So I think that the best thing Israel can do at the moment is start calling the American policy for what it is and saying that the appeasement of Iran is a danger to Israel because, frankly, Chris, I am not sure we can survive, Israel can survive another 4 years of appeasement towards a murderous Nazi regime that is acquiring nuclear weapons. The Biden administration has set the Middle East on fire, and this has become an existential danger, a direct threat to the existence of the state of Israel.
Wow. Now that Israel is in Rafah, they're actually on the border between Egypt and the Gaza Strip. Where do you see this operation going in Rafah?
Well, I hope that Netanyahu will make good on his promise to carry this through, to see this through to the end, and not just as a means of pressure to get a better hostage deal. Because if we don't cut the smuggling underground highways under the border with Egypt, Hamas will continue to stand on its feet. And this is crucial because Hamas is the smallest of our enemies. If we finish this war without decisive victory and without exacting a real price for those who initiated it, then the bigger sharks will smell our blood in the water, and we will be exposed to Hezbollah, direct Iranian attacks. And we have on our borders also the growing militias in Syria, in West Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen to the south.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, Gadi?
I put my faith in the amazing courage of our young soldiers who have demonstrated that they are willing to go to any length to save Israel from this acute danger. I hope that this spirit will somehow percolate up also to the upper echelons and brass of the IDF, who seem to be much more hesitant. And it's probably not a coincidence that this may stem from the fact that we send them to American progressive universities, the state of which we are now seeing all over the news.
Yeah. Finally, tell us about your podcast, Israel Update with Michael Doron. It's on by tablet and magazine. Tell us about your podcast.
It's also a courtesy of the Hudson Institute, where Mike is a senior fellow. And what we do there is try to help the viewers and listeners wade their way through the barrage of spins, because we have a dual perspective. Mike sits in Washington and is an expert on American foreign policy, and I'm on the ground in Israel. And I hope that together we are able to show our readers and listening what is really happening behind the headlines.
Well, it sounds like a great combination, and certainly people need to wade through all the information or disinformation here in the Middle East and the United States.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Gadi.
Thanks for having me, Chris.